For me, this was the best episode in the series thus far and an explosive ending to Season 4. I cannot wait to see what's in store for us. Game of Thrones Season 4, Episode 10, The Children. What an awesome season finale and just a fantastic, just greatly realized season of Game of Thrones, I tell you. Well, hello, my brothers and sisters of the Nerd Nation. I, as always, am Jim, here to bring you another review on the awesome, adventure-filled, blood-soaked tale of Game of Thrones. Now, of course, last episode took place entirely at the Wall, at Castle Black, and it wasn't my favorite episode. And it wasn't for the characters or because there was lack of fighting or action or production values. It's because leading up to that, the characters at the Wall and their stories, for the most part, had really gone unrealized. And they had really been ignored for the most part by the showrunners. So all of a sudden just kind of thrusting us into it and then saying, here, watch this for 55 minutes, to me was a little bit lackluster because we hadn't been given any reason prior to that to watch them for 55 minutes. And a lot of people blasted me in the comments of my review and said, but you don't understand, it's so important. And many of those were book readers. I am not a book reader, so I don't know what the overall importance is of it. I can obviously recognize and realize that an army of 100,000 wildlings and giants and everything else marching on the Wall on Castle Black, along with White Walkers coming in behind them somewhere, is certainly a threat. However, was not really... don't have a full grasp, I guess you should say, on it because of the fact that we haven't really been shown too much of that. So... anyway, without further ado, let's get right into it. This season finale, this episode, probably, and I've said this a few times this season, is probably my favorite episode of not just the season, but the actual series itself. And for many reasons. A lot of different plots and things like that and with characters were wrapped up, and we'll just kind of go from location to location and start out where it opens. It opens right where we left off last week, which I thought was masterfully done, and that's with Jon Snow, of course, walking north of the Wall, has gone out the Black Gate and going to meet Mance Rayder unarmed. As he walks past all the kind of death and destruction and whatnot from the previous night's fight, he walks up to, and although is surrounded by wildlings, he pretty much walks right up to Mance Rayder's tent. Mance, of course, he knows that he's not one of his people, and says you're wearing a black cloak and this and that. The conversation between these two when they sit down, I thought was very well done. And Mance Rayder is one of those characters that we haven't seen him since the beginning of Season 3, and if you're just a casual viewer, you'd probably even forget who the hell the guy is. I remember him because he played Julius Caesar on HBO's series Rome, which was probably about 7-8 years old now, but I just remember the character himself, and he's been in several other TV shows, movies, things like that. He's a very good actor. Him and Jon sit down and start talking, and he winds up saying, and they have just this great conversation, and some of the highlights for me was when he said, so clearly you are still a crow and this and that. He goes, I really wanted to believe that you were loyal when you this and that, and the whole thing was loyalty. And Jon says, I wound up killing the half-hand at his request so I could, get into your camp and gain your trust, right, and spy on you and bring news of that back to the Night's Watch. So I was loyal, just to my brothers, not to you, And I thought that was great, right? So Mance winds up sitting down and asks about Ygritte, and he explains how she died and this and that and everything else. And I was waiting for some kind of like cliche bombshell where he was going to be like, that's my daughter or some shit, right? Anyway, what he does is he winds up saying, let's have a drink to her. And I love how Jon goes and looks at the drink. He's hesitant to take it. And Mance looks up at him, and without a hesitation, he just says, out of all the ways that I'd like to kill you, poison is always at the would be at the bottom of that list, And I thought, it makes sense. Why the hell? He could do anything he wants to him right there. Jon came to him unarmed and said that he came to negotiate terms of peace, right? So anyway, I love how they have this conversation. They go and they drink to her, and Mance Rayder says, one of our giants went into the gate or whatever and never came out. And he goes, and Jon Snow goes, yeah, he's dead, And he goes and he explains that his name was Mag the Magnificent, or Mag the Great, something along those lines. and he was a king. He was basically a king amongst and amongst this centuries old tribe. I don't know a ton, again, because I haven't read the books, but basically, like, hey, this person was royalty, And John had explained, he goes, and he killed, one of our guys, one of my friends, Gren. And it's funny because then John goes, Gren was from a farm, because after Mance goes into about how this guy Mag was royalty and everything else, and for me, it just kind of showed that it doesn't matter who you are. When you get into battle, you could be a farmer or you could be a king, but a farmer can still take down a king, So I kind of like that. Anyway, as this is all going on, and what I really liked is how the setting of this happened. One of the coolest action shots, and this is really how I think last week's episode should have ended off. All of a sudden, man, there's all kinds of commotion outside, and Mance is like, "Are you attacking us?" And John's like, "No, it's like you said, we don't have enough men, Also, what I like, too, is Mance explained, and he was telling John about truths. He said that he sent 400 men about 5 miles down on the wall to climb up over it and to basically be another raiding party and to attack them again because he knows that they're decimated. And that's what I thought that they should have been doing last week, was attacking at different points on the wall. However, Mance's whole thing was that he was really just testing them, it seemed like, in last week's episode. And that raid was really just to see what their strength was and what they could actually do to them. And again, it was done very well, I think. And it was nice to see somebody thinking outside the box and, hey, there's this big stretch of wall. Let's go up somewhere else, And he goes, some won't make it over, but most will. And the point is that we'll be able to go. And it's exactly what I talked about last week. It's called strategy. Obviously, you're not going to bring 100,000 people, women, children, everything else over the wall. But you bring a big enough party up on that wall to take out the just handful of crows there are. And you can have the wall and then open the black gate from inside. Anyway, as all this shit's going on, there's commotion outside and everything. We see a beautiful overhead shot and just hundreds and thousands of horse-mounted, obviously, knights and whatnot, warriors, soldiers on horseback, right? And for anybody who doesn't know a ton about warfare and stuff like that, I've read a lot of fantasy books and a lot of different stuff about medieval and even some of the different wars that we've had throughout the ages. The Revolutionary War, a lot of them that were fought primarily from, mounted riders, cavalry on horseback. And they say that one armed rider is worth anywhere between 3 to 5 actual foot soldiers. And mainly because the size and speed of the horse, you can mow people down. You can run people over. You don't even have to kill them yourself. The horse itself can trample people because they're so big and powerful, obviously. So they just come in and just start wiping out all of the wildlings, right, that are there. And they're fighting back for a minute or two. And eventually they wind up just kind of giving in. And Mance says, you know what, enough. Our people have bled enough. And the terms he gave to John were, listen, you open up the gate and let us through because we're just trying to get away from the White Walkers. You do that and we'll let you live, And of course, the Crows aren't going to do that. Of course, the Night's Watch is not going to open up the gate and do it. But you see the human side of the thing of the whole story from the wildlings, because for me, other than in the comments when people said, "Oh, geez, they're running from the White Walkers," John's solution last week was, "I'm going to go kill Mance Rayder." He united all these tribes, then they'll all just disband and go back to their homes. So clearly, I wasn't the only one that was thinking along those lines. But now we find out and we get the confirmation from Mance Rayder that obviously they are, of course, moving for survival as well from the White Walkers, not just to go and attack. They just need to get behind that wall too, So it was something that was briefly mentioned and alluded to, but again, 2 seasons ago or a season and a half ago. Sometimes it's hard to remember some of the little details that come in, and probably it's probably more pronounced and more profound and much more in your face in the books. But anyway, the scene was great because who is it that rides in? And I thought this was just great and rides into glory. But Stannis Baratheon, right? And his newfound army, man. Oh, he's got everybody with him. He's got Melisandre with him. He's got Ser Davros with him. And they come in and start kicking ass and taking names. When Mance goes and tells everybody to yield, and Stannis, gets down and whatnot, there's this scene where he's going to approach them, and a wildling goes to come at him, like to take him out, cut off the head of the snake, right? And all of a sudden, one of his riders just comes by and just wipes him out, And I'm thinking, oh, this is great, because this is the first time that we've seen this show since Stannis was introduced. We've seen him actually accomplish a goal that he set out to do, He obviously got his ass handed to him at Blackwater and wound up having to pull back and retreat. And other than that, you just see him kind of brooding and angry a lot around a table somewhere in fucking wherever he's at, Storm's End or whatever. And he's just very, I'm sorry, Dragonstone. I made that mistake earlier in the season. But, and it's just dark and desolate and cold, anyways, we get that whole thing, and I thought that was great. We get an exchange between him and Jon Snow. And Sir Davros says, "Oh, and you need to acknowledge him as your grace, and this and that." And Jon says, "I know who you are, my grace. My father died, contacting you, and in the service of the crown, basically going and trying to give you the information needed." So, and that's what that whole thing did at the end of the first season. Ned Stark being beheaded, it really, yes, it did. It sparked the war, and it sparked a lot of other things. But it also wound up going and bringing Stannis into the picture, and now we see Stannis. And Stannis now, in my opinion, has a very strong position, because not just the Watchers on the Wall, which there's not many of, but he goes and gets Mance Rayder's army to surrender. And honestly, I think if he's smart, he says, "Hey, listen, we'll let you and everybody else come south of the wall and set up camp, do whatever you want. Your fighters, though, are loyal to me now, because I have to go and push my right to the throne, my claim to the throne." So that's kind of what I see happening going into next season, if he's smart anyway, because even if it's only 10% of those 100,000 wildlings are formidable fighters, look, that's 10,000 more to put in your army, and I guarantee it's probably more like 40 or 50,000. It's probably more like half that can fight, So very, very cool stuff with that. We wind up seeing them as well at actually at Castle Black after that. But what I liked is the conversation between Stannis and Jon Snow. And he said, he goes, "Your father was a great man and this and that. I respected him very much. What do you think he would do in a situation like this?" And Jon says, he goes, "I was a captor in this guy's camp. He could have tortured me, could have beaten me to try to get information. He didn't do any of that. He wound up eventually trusting me and this and that. But the point is that he showed me mercy and kindness when he could have done the exact opposite. So I think you should do the same. I think you should take him prisoner and see what kind of information you can get from him." So that's what winds up happening. As they go and burn the bodies and everything else, and that's all going on, while there's burning bodies in kind of the middle of the courtyard at Castle Black, we see the Melisandre, the Red Lady, looking over at Jon Snow. And me and my wife and son are just sitting there like, oh, God, she's going to want, next thing you know, she's going to want to go and tie him down and bang him, get him all hard, and then put freaking leeches on his dick. Blood leeches or whatever she did with Gendry, who we didn't see all season. But anyway, that's how that part of it, I guess you should say, wraps up. There was a brief exchange between Tormund, who had been healed up, and he kind of didn't understand why he was actually healed. He asked Jon, he said, "Why did your maester heal me up?" And he said he swore an oath to help anybody who was in need. We're not selective. Just because you're a wildling doesn't mean he's not going to patch you up. But there was this whole exchange between them about what would you like to do? Would you like to say some words over your dead, that sort of thing? We got to burn them. And Tormund's like, "Say what, boy?" They don't really believe in a lot of that stuff. However, he wanted him to go and give Ygritte the courtesy of a proper burial north of the wall, right? So that scene ends with Jon going, and he has her on a pyre of sticks and what have you, and looks like by one of those big trees was I forget the names of the trees, but anyway, he goes and and burns her, and then as he's walking away, it's a very powerful scene. He's tearing up and everything, and you actually see some emotion from Jon Snow. So I really enjoyed Kit Harington and his portrayal of Jon Snow, especially in this season. I believe he's a great character, and I believe it's a great actor that's playing him, and one of those characters that I've come to like more and more as the seasons have wore on, I guess I should say. Now the next scene takes us to King's Landing, but unfortunately we don't see any of Tyrion until later in the episode, and I know obviously that's where a lot of people were left hanging after the brutal events that happened, of course, between Oberyn and the Mountain at the end of episode 8. What I thought was very nice is that we see this scene with Cersei. Actually, there's 3 scenes with Cersei, and she's with different people in each one. But this just shows you that she's still at the top of her game mentally, as far as just the deception and kind of doing what she wants when she wants to get what she wants. Just being that very deceptive type of person that sort of plays on off of everybody's emotions to get what she needs. In the first scene, we see that the Mountain is laying there, and it's kind of like a Frankenstein type thing, man. He's laying there, and we find out that he had been poisoned. There was obviously poison on the blade that Oberyn used against him. So regardless of what he did to Oberyn, it seems like he'll still have the last laugh from the grave as the Mountain is suffering and dying a horrible death. Maester Pycelle says, "There's nothing else that I can do, and this and that," and he's kind of like the Trapper John, if anybody ever watched that show. And then they got, and Cersei goes and dismisses him and basically tells him to get out of there for this other doctor that's there. And he reminds me of more of kind of like an out there witch doctor type, or something along the lines of like a Dr. Frankenstein. That he says he has this method that he can somehow keep him alive. And I don't know what Cersei's real big deal is with keeping him alive, other than that maybe now that Jaime's crippled and only has the one hand and stuff like that, she just wants to have like the biggest, strongest dude in the realm that she can send on errands and killing missions for. I'm not really sure. Don't know what his significance is moving forward, but basically the scene plays out like she asks if him saving him, this other maester or whatever he is, doctor, witch doctor, she says, you know, will it make him weaker? And he says, oh no. So you know clearly that means it must make him stronger, but really, do you need anything stronger than the mountain? I mean, what's stronger than the mountain? Like the Incredible Hulk? You know, it's a King Kong, a Yeti, I don't know. So anyway, the scene goes and it plays out pretty cool, but she basically says, do what you got to do to save him. We then go and get, and this is one of my favorite scenes with Cersei, and again, you know, I just love to hate her, you know, she does such a fantastic job. She goes and she confronts Tywin, and she says that she's not going to marry Loras, and she's not going to move to Highgarden, and he's like, you know, the usual commanding presence that Charles Dance is. He says, of course you will, and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And she goes and explains, she goes, no, if I go off to Highgarden, you ship me off to Highgarden, you know, my last Joffrey's dead, right? Marcellus is basically being held prisoner down in Dorne. And Tommen, my last son that will be alive, will be here on the throne, and it'll be being pulled every which way between you and Marjorie, right? You know, until basically you'll just pull him apart and there'll be nothing left of the boy that I knew. So it really is, whether you love or hate Cersei, and I'm kind of in that in-between phase, again, kind of love to hate her, you really, from a mother's perspective, or a parental, I guess, parental perspective, you have to think about it, and if you had 3 children, and one of them was dead, and one of them had been shipped off, and your youngest was on the throne, but you knew that your father, who was manipulative, and this other woman who was very manipulative, are basically going to ruin and destroy him over the next 5, 10, 20 years, however long they can to get their hooks into him, you too would probably be very protective. So I'm not saying that I agree with everything she does, but I am saying that I can understand some of it. I can understand where she's coming from that, you know, that parental perspective, I guess you'd say. So what she winds up doing is basically telling Tywin, I'm a brother fucker. You know, she says that what you were always afraid of, or you had heard, the rumors are true. And Tywin, it's funny, because I don't know if he ever actually knew and he just sort of pretended like it didn't happen, or if he really is just that wrapped up in other matters of the realm that he just always thought they were rumors and never thought that anybody in his family would actually do that. She goes and gets up in his face and she says that I love my brother. And, you know, and she says, I will take down if you don't give me my way, you know, let me do what I want, because I am staying here. I'm not marrying Loras. I'm not going off to Highgarden. He explains it's her duty and everything else, like he does with everybody, just trying to be manipulative and get the chess pieces, the pawns where he needs them. She straight up says no, and if you do attempt to do it, I'll destroy this whole family's legacy, period, the one that you're so worried about. And when he says, how are you going to do that? She says, I'll let everybody know that the 3 children that I have were illegitimate, that they're not Robert Baratheon's, the late Robert Baratheon, that they're mine and my brother, Jaime's, you know. So very, very powerful and very manipulative the way she did. And it was the first time in the series that I think I saw Tywin kind of squirm a little bit. He really didn't seem to know what to do, you know. And then after that, we wind up seeing her in a 3rd scene where she actually goes and approaches Jaime, and just, you know, more or less she says, I choose you. I choose you. And I never really, I still don't, you know, enjoy, agree with the whole incestual thing, regardless of whether it happened in this fictional world, or the Targaryens wed brother and sister for hundreds of years. That's great, but it's still fucking weird, you know, just to me, it really is. And whenever I see those two kissing up on each other and stuff, it just sort of makes me uncomfortable. But anyway, the scene itself played out. It was fairly short, and it was basically her getting her hooks back into Jaime and seeing what, in fact, you know, she can get from him. But it was really, I think, a lot of it was pure emotion for her, saying, I choose you. I can finally tell you. I told Father what happened. And Jaime's like, whoa, what? What the fuck? Are you serious? And then she goes and she gets down on her knees, and I swear to God, I thought she was going to start to go down on him. I'm like, oh my God, really? You know, and I figured he'd be patting her on the head with his metal hand, you know, dong, dong, dong. You know, so, go deep, go deep. Anyway, all right, we got to get away from that stuff. Nonetheless, though, that's what it looked like at first, but she actually went down and kissed his metal hand, which obviously would have been bad to do if it was outside and it was, you know, winter, because then her lips would have stuck to it. But she kisses the hand, they start making out and everything, and you presume that they, you know, they get busy on making more, you know, illegitimate bastard children, incestual bastard children, or whatever you want to call them. So anyway, as her scene goes and comes to a close, I just thought, how masterfully done by Cersei as she goes and kind of plays everybody against the middle again for her own devices. Now in this action-packed and just story-driven explosive finale, the next scene in Meereen where we see Daenerys, for me was the weakest of the bunch. And that's not to say that it was bad, it just means that everything else was so good to me that it overshadowed this particular scene. And the whole scene in Meereen now, first of all, it just seems a bit empty without Jorah. It does. It really does, without his commanding presence there. And I understand why she did it and everything else, and I understand. But with her just standing there with only Sir Barristan behind her, I don't know. It just doesn't feel complete to me. But she's over there playing queen. And first we get this this plot device here, I guess we're going to call it plot point, with this older gentleman that comes in that basically says, listen, even though now I'm free, but I don't know what to do with myself. I'm old, I'm resistant to change. The bottom line is that he was owned by a slaver, but the slaver had him teaching children and stuff like that, and he was loved by children, loved by men, and he felt important, right? And having an aging father who, now that his kids are grown up and he's unable to go and just work and bury himself in that because of physical illnesses, I understand where he's coming from, because as you get older, you get resistant to change, and you're scared of it. You're nervous. You don't know what to do with yourself and your time. And he basically begs her to be able to go back into the servitude of this slaver, which she grants him. She says, well, part of having freedom is freedom of choice. So if you choose to do that, that's fine, but the contract will last for no longer than a year and this and that. And then after he leaves, Sir Barristan reminds her that basically he's going to be, he's going to be a slave in everything but name only. So, and she's just kind of like, hey, listen, that's how the cookie crumbles. The next guy that comes in and brings in, just he's crying and he's very upset, and he goes and has this cloth cradled with, what appears to be something. You can't tell at first what it is. When he drops it down, it's the remains of, it's the bones of a child, right? And we find out that, in fact, her big dragon, the large one, Drogon, I believe its name is not just burning goats anymore, right? It actually, burned his three-year-old daughter. And it's a very moving scene, it really is, because having children myself and thinking in my mind, you got to be kidding me. You're sitting there and all of a sudden this woman comes over and takes over the land and everything else, and the next thing you know, you got a fucking dragon takes out your 3-year-old. What do you do? Anyway, what this does is it gives her a reason to actually go and have to finally kind of tame the dragons. The whole theme this year with her, from the first episode of the season when we saw Drogon and he kind of snapped at her and everything else, was really, it was the whole, you cannot tame the dragons. You may be the mother of dragons. They'll listen to you for a certain period of time maybe, but as they grow and come into their own, you're not going to be able to control them. And that's really what it was, is that, for me, the theme is that you're trying so hard to be able to control things within, Meereen, within just these areas that you've liberated, but at the same time you're losing control because it's not as easy as you think. And the theme of that really winds up being seen at the end of the scene, because she does have to go and actually, it's actually kind of heartfelt when she goes. She has the two smaller dragons go and follow her in, and she takes them down into the catacombs and takes them down in there. And it's very symbolic, because she has to go and put chains on both of them around their neck, and they kind of come up to her like puppy dogs, come up, and she pets them, puts the chain on them. But the whole theme, though, is that she's the breaker of chains, okay? She's the one, it's in her name when you say it, Daenerys Stormborn, breaker of chains, and all the other stuff. And the whole theme that runs through this show, at least for her, is that she frees those that are slaves, that are in chains. And now she has to take one of her most prized possessions that, as far as we know, she's the only one in the world that possesses them. And dragons haven't been around for generations and generations. And now she has to go and put them in chains, So it's very symbolic to me that, unfortunately, as good as your intentions are about freeing the world, there's still going to be those certain people, especially with the older person, that was there. That theme was that, you freed me, but no, I need to be chained. I don't know anything else, So there's really a neat kind of thing going on there, and I really enjoyed it the way it was set up. But again, out of all the scenes, it was probably my least favorite of the actual finale itself. Now, as we break into the second half of the show, and actually it's nice because without commercials, when you get a 55-minute show, it's actually like getting a 90-minute show on regular network television, because there's no commercials. And then for this particular episode, I think they upped it to like 65 or 66 minutes, and it doesn't seem like, oh, I gave you an extra 8-9 minutes. But it really is. When you think about all the footage and everything that has to go into shooting just a minute, you know, in this particular, the set pieces and the characters, the CG, everything that they use, very, very good stuff. The second half is where things really pick up. And this is the first time for me that I always recognized that Brand and his quest, you know, Three-Eyed Raven and all that, I knew it would be important down the line. And I'm glad that down the line has come to now. I made a lot of predictions earlier in the season on the podcast that I do on Zorro Fanboys channel. And one of the things that I said was that I felt like Brand had a bigger purpose to go north, and that him with the Three-Eyed Raven and communicating and everything else, I had a feeling that he was going to either reawaken or meet some of the last of the children of the forest. Now, for any of you that don't read the books, and of course I don't, but I do watch a lot of the extras that are on my DVD sets, as well as some of the different things that they put on HBO On Demand. And one of the first things that I learned about was the children of the forest. And back when the first men wound up coming across the narrow sea, the children of the forest and them, they fought for generations, right? And eventually, they wound up kind of coming to a, kind of have a pact where they said, all right, well, we'll handle the forest and you get everything else. And that worked out fine until the Andals came across and started wiping them out mercilessly. And then, of course, there was the White Walkers. What wound up happening, though, in a nutshell, without getting into too big of a history lesson, because that's an entirely different video, which I'll be doing a lot of these in the off-season, where I try to go and kind of explain some of the different areas and some of the different backgrounds, some of the different people, places, that sort of thing. But the bottom line is the children of the forest are pretty much like these elves, I guess you would say. That's what they remind me of, like these elves or pixies, fairies, magical creatures, right? They're smaller, they look like children. Anyway, last anybody heard from them hundreds or thousands of years ago is that the last few were driven north and that they were gone, that they were out of existence. Now, it seems like everybody in Westeros is not very clued in on to what's going on, because they also thought that giants were extinct as well. And as we've seen this season, there's giants, right? And the whole thing, though, that I really liked about this scene is as it goes and plays off, you got, you know, Hodor, and he's in there, and they're in the north now. It reminds you out of like Lord of the Rings, you know. There's the snow coming down and everything. They can't go on any further. Jojen and his sister Mira, and oh, we're not gonna make it. They wind up going and getting to a point where they go and they see just this the vision, what they had in the vision, that beautiful tree, right? And just out of the middle of nowhere, the stark contrast is all of a sudden there's cold and desolation everywhere, and then all of a sudden there's just this tree, and I looked at it and I just felt like it was the tree of life, you know, and some sort of magical tree. As they're going and making their way down into there, though, one of the best action scenes, and this all of a sudden turned into like a fantasy tale of like and again, like on a Lord of the Rings type of scale. They did an excellent job as all of a sudden they're crossing over, and Hodor and Brand are ahead, right? And they're crossing over this area, this field, this whatever, and all of a sudden, man, hands start popping out of the ground, and it's these skeletons, you know? And the skeletons go and they start taking out, you know, Jojen and Mira, and they're trying to fight back. And Brand commands Hodor, go help them, you know, and Hodor, he's a Hodor, you know, and that guy's got the best line in the whole, yeah, Hodor. It's all he has to say all year long, you know, and be big. But anyway, as he goes to try to help them, it's a losing battle, and they're losing ground, and everybody's going to wind up, you know, dying if this keeps up. Brand actually, really cool. He almost gets, you know, attacked. Well, he is getting attacked, and this one climbs up on him, one of these skeletons. And they did such a nice job with the CG on it, because, you know, it's one thing to reanimate zombies and that type of stuff, but these are what I believe they refer to as whites, and I think that they're, I think it's that White Walkers can actually go and kind of like bring back these skeletons, bring back the dead, and pretty much reanimate these corpses to use for their own devices. So that's what I got from that. But anyway, I could be wrong though too. I'm sure everybody will let me know in the comments down below if I am. But the scene itself was great. Right as Brand is about to get taken out by one of these, man, his wolf comes in and just takes this thing out. Brand winds up going all warg style, man, like he did a few episodes back with Hodor. Starts controlling Hodor and just starts whipping these things around, bashing them, breaking them in half. And it's cool because at one point there's one of these things on his back, and it's like got this mallet, and he's like smashing Hodor in the face, and just the whole scene was just done so beautifully. As they're starting to kind of lose ground again, even with Hodor being kind of warged out by Brand, number one, Jojen gets stabbed. He gets stabbed by an errant arm that was still, you know, that had a knife in it, and gets stabbed like 4 or 5 times. Now, he actually saw his death earlier in the season and still decided to continue on this journey, which I really, you know, I have to commend him for that, because honestly, Jojen and Mira for me were very weak characters. The way they were introduced, I didn't find them very interesting as they traveled along last season and really didn't have much to go and offer in the way of why we're doing this or what for. It was all very cryptic, and I just didn't like them a lot. As this season's gone on, though, I really do. I've liked them much more, and certainly, you know, you wind up feeling much more of a loss when a character like that is injured or killed or what have you. So excellent job on their end. But anyway, all of a sudden, it's cool. Just like a fireball comes out of nowhere, man. You know, like something out of an RPG video game or something, man. You know, and one of these things explodes. We go over and we see this cool little like elf-looking fairy thing that looks like something out of Peter Pan. It's one of the children of the forest, obviously. And it's like, you know, come with me if you want to live type of situation. Now, Mira doesn't want to leave her brother Jojen, right? And she's just like, listen, you can either come with me and live or you can stay here and die. It's as simple as that. I'm not here to go and play games with you. So Mira goes and does the difficult thing, the extremely difficult thing. And it was a very tearful scene as well, whether you like the characters or not, just the way it was done. Jojen goes and says, you know, you have to leave me. Just leave me. So Mira winds up going, and even though he's injured and he's at the end of his rope, she can't drag him across. She winds up going and cutting his throat. At first, I thought she was going to stab herself, honestly. I was thinking, okay, well, I can't go on. My brother's dead. I'm going to kill myself. But she didn't take herself out of the equation. She did give him the merciful death. So obviously, these whites wouldn't, you know, do whatever the hell they were going to do to him, torture him, whatever, before he died. And they wind up getting away. And the scene itself was very cool because as they go and get into this cave, all just heavy action, you know, fantasy, sci-fi type stuff. And these things, as they go to come into the cave, they just start exploding. Clearly, there's some kind of barrier of magic or barrier of magical protection or something along those lines. Again, things that you would see in a really cool fantasy epic type of thing. And really, after the first episode of the first season with the White Walkers, and then there not being a whole lot of that other than maybe the dragons occasionally, this seemed like it was a medieval type of soap opera that was grounded more in like reality than it was, you know, in the fantasy type stuff. So I was really happy to see that because I love those type of things. As they get into the cave, though, and are kind of introduced, I guess you would say, you know, to this person, this child of the forest, they wind up also going and seeing that it's kind of weird. It's this older guy, and he's just sort of like hanging there up in these branches, you know. And what he is he's the physical manifestation of the three-eyed raven. So whether it's actually just like a spirit or whether it's just like life force and magical energy, I'm not really sure at this point. I just know that it was cool because he goes and talks to Brandon, and he's talking to him, obviously, Brandon Stark. He knows who he is. We've been waiting for you. He explains about how Jojen, of course, you know, saw that he was going to die and decided to come anyway. And there's a little bit of a conversation between those two. But what a way to end off the season with those two, to finally have something culminate. And I shouldn't say those two. Obviously, there's Mira, there's Hodor, and there's Brandon. But to end off the season with him finally getting to somewhere and finally, you know, and of course finding out too that these previously thought to be extinct or gone from the world children of the forest, these magical creatures, are alive. That was the whole theory that I had, was that he was going to play a big part in awakening or helping them to kind of come rally to their side to combat the White Walkers that were, of course, marching south on the wall now with all their dead and everything else, you know. So, very, very cool stuff. He winds up saying, oh, well, so I will walk again, you know? And he says, no, you'll never walk again. And I was like, oh, way to shoot a guy in the dick, right? You know, just shot his horse, you know, right down. And he says, no, but you'll fly. And I'm assuming that means that he's going to be able to teach him how to use his ward power to go and actually inhabit flying creatures or something along that line to kind of take it to the next level. I'm not really sure. I just know that, again, it was very, very exciting to see, and one of the coolest moments for me, and something that did a great job of taking a character and that whole kind of plot and storyline and really just doing some nice things with it. Because other than that, and other than the little side thing with Craster's Keep and whatnot for an episode, it's pretty much just been, oh, hey, let's check in with them and see how far they've traveled through like a desolate wood again, you know? There's not really a lot going on, but it culminated all beautifully in this episode and was just so expertly done. Then we move on here to the next scene, and this one and the fight that precedes it may be one of my favorite of the series just because it was so brutal and just done so well. We wind up seeing Brienne of Tarth and Podrick, who we know that they had gotten some information on actually going to the Eyrie because that's where that's where they believe that Arya Stark was going to be headed, and they know now that she's with the Hound. So they wind up going and coming upon Arya, and Arya's, you know, she's doing her little water dancing with her sword and everything, and as they're approaching, she doesn't know who the hell they are. They don't have, you know, Facebook and Twitter and shit like that, you know. They don't even have cameras, so a lot of times you don't know how anybody looks unless you've seen them in person or somebody describes them. And how are you going to describe somebody? Oh, tall and fair-haired, you know. Okay, that's fucking half the realm. Anyway, so Arya goes and she's like, stop, you can take a shit later. So, and you don't see him, he's off camera, but you assume that the Hound obviously is over there bent over taking a dump, and Arya was supposed to be watching out for him. As Podrick and Brienne approach and they start to talk to her and this and that, and then once the Hound actually comes up and starts talking, you can just feel the tension in the air. You can just cut it with a knife. It's so great. Brienne winds up coming to the realization and through Podrick going and saying, that's the Hound, you know. The Hound thinks that they're there to try to collect the bounty on his head. Brienne's just like trying to explain, no, I swore an oath to your mother, Catelyn Stark. And then Arya's just straight up like, my mother's dead. And she's like, I know, but I still promised her that I would bring you back to your home, you and your sister, you know. That was the oath that I swore, this and that, you know. She says, well, are you a knight? And she says, no. And then it's great because we get the Hound who goes and he doesn't want to give up his hostage or his prey over there. He just says, she's not coming with you, you know. And then he goes and he breaks out about the Valyrian steel. Well, where'd you get that sword? And obviously she has that sword, Oathkeeper. And what I liked about it is prior to that, when they were first talking, they talked a little bit about the names of the swords, you know, and Brienne said, this is called Oathkeeper. What's the name of yours? She says, Arya says, Needle. It's a great name, blah, 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 you know. But there's really a lot of symbolism there because you got to remember that that sword, the Oathkeeper, was melted down from the Valyrian steel, which is like next to impossible to find. It's very rare. From her father, Ned Stark's actual sword, you know. So it's very cool, very symbolic. And I was really like, okay, this is cool. These are two very strong female characters within this series, and now they're finally meeting up, and Brienne is going to wind up kind of helping take her somewhere, right? So the bottom line is, and the Hound goes and brings this up. Number one, what's the deal? You're with the Lannisters now? Because she says about how she couldn't come to save her when she should have, that her mother, you know, Catelyn sent her off with Jaime Lannister to take him to King's Landing, and obviously for the exchange of the two, you know, and we know how everything played out, but Arya doesn't know. She's been gone for a year or two on the road, you know, and been through a lot too. So the Hound winds up going and of course just basically saying, listen, you know, her mother's dead, Winterfell's burned to the ground, her aunt is dead, her brother's dead. There's nowhere safe for her to go. And he brings it up like, and he says it just like it is. There's nowhere safe for you anymore to go in this world, you know? And I like that because Brienne's still like, well, yeah, but it doesn't matter. Like, I made a promise. I took an oath. I'm going to go and serve that out. So it's great because her and the Hound wind up having this battle. And I mean, it's brutal. It is absolutely brutal. To see these two fight. At first, it starts out a little lackluster, just a little back and forth clanging of swords, you know. A couple minutes into it, Brienne winds up actually getting pretty much getting the drop or getting the advantage on the Hound, winds up knocking his sword away or getting his sword out of his hand, and then has her sword, you know, basically to his chest, and he's, you know, she's got position over him and everything, and she says, I'm not looking to kill you. And now you got to remember that she fights like in the way that they would in a castle, in a keep, in a tournament, so to speak, with the respect that knights give to one another, you know. Okay, I've beat you. I can either choose to kill you, or I can just basically acknowledge and say, yes, I bested you. Let's just kind of move on with things. And he goes, and I love this, he's just like, I'm not a fucking knight. And he goes and he grabs her sword, the end of it, with both of his hands and starts going and pulling it, you know. And his hands are just bleeding, and I'm like, oh my god, it's so freaking gross. I hate when my hands get cut for some reason. But anyway, he does that, and then goes and winds up just tearing into her and starting to fight more. He goes to jack her up and hit her, and she goes and turns and gives him an undercut grab or punch to the balls. And I mean, just brutal. This was like a street fight, you know? This wasn't like a Rocky in the ring type of fight. This was like Rocky 5 when he fights Tommy Gunn at the end of it, and it's a street fight, man. It's like head bouncing off the pavement. Fucking brutal, you know? And I just thought it was done so well. And again, maybe one of my best or favorite fights, if not my favorite fight in the entire series, just because of the way it was done, you know. And as they're going back and forth, I mean, he gets over top of her and just starts bam, bam, and he's just smashing her with his fist, you know. Then she winds up getting the advantage over him again, you know. And as they're going back and forth, and I can't even go into every little detail because you just had to be there. You had to see it. And obviously, if you're watching this, you probably have at this point. You probably are going to again. But what winds up happening is at the end, she winds up just going nuts. And I love her brutal, like, just womanly scream. It's not the usual, like, shrill, oh, save me, right? The high-pitched thing. Hers, it's more just like, it's this guttural, like, oh, ooh, you know, as she's nailing him, and you're just thinking, man, I don't want to mess with this woman, you know. And I'm thinking, and in real life, I think she's like 6'2", 6'3" in real life. She's actually a model, but yeah, Gwendolyn, I can't remember her name, but anyway, something Gwendolyn. Nonetheless, though, just absolutely brutal this fight, you know, and you'd think that the Hound would wind up being the more brutal fighter and getting the advantage. At the end, she's just grabbing him, and as they're approaching the edge of this little drop off, this cliff, she's just boom, boom, boom. I mean, she's just smashing that face in, you know. Eventually winds up jacking him up, and he goes off the cliff and winds up rolling down this hill, and you think he's pretty much done for, right? She starts going, and she's out of breath. She's screaming. She's Arya Stark, and she's of course trying to find Arya. Arya winds up sometime later, we don't know how long, going, and the scene between her and the Hound, she winds up finding him, and she sees that he's all battered, he's done for, he's got a hole in his side, he's not in a good way, right? He got his ass kicked by a woman, and of course, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. She's a big, powerful woman. She's scaring me. I'd want her to be on my side, not fight against her, because I'd lose. So that's definitely not putting down women in general. She's a very good, strong female character, and her and Arya really helped to carry the show in that sense. So I think anyway. However, the scene between these two, it was great, and it was also disturbing at the same time, because the Hound has really done a great job. Rory McCann has done a great job this season of making you care about the Hound. And I don't like him, but I sympathize with him more, I guess I should say, or I empathize with his position and how he grew up and everything else, right? And, you know, you don't want to see, even when him and Brienne were fighting, you know, my wife was on the edge of her seat because she was like, no, they're going to kill Brienne, I know it, and I love her character, you know. And I was thinking, oh, okay, well, maybe they're going to kill the Hound, maybe they're going to kill her, but either way, it's an epic battle. But the scene between the Hound and Arya, Arya goes and talks with him a little bit, and, you know, he says, basically, I'm done for, and this and that. You know, go with her, she'll help to protect you. And then Arya says, there's no protection for me, there's no safety for me, I'm not going to do that. And he says, you know, if you're not with somebody, you won't last a day. And she's like, I'll last longer than you. And Arya, always the smart ass with the witty comments, you know. But anyway, he basically says, do you remember where the heart is, you know, and asks her to end his life, right? And he says, then you can cross me off your damn list, girl, you know. And Arya goes and gets close to him, you know, takes the little bit of silver that he has, a little bit of coin that they had, and then goes and leaves him, right? And starts walking away. And he's just like, kill me! Kill me! And I thought that was the ultimate... I mean, you don't actually see him die, so I don't know if he winds up living. Somebody comes across him and helps him, you know. He basically says he's done unless there's a maester around somewhere. They're out in the middle of nowhere, right? 10 miles from the Eyrie, I think they said. But the point of this whole thing is that Arya... throughout her being a captor of his or whatever, they really did. They bonded and became friends in a certain sort of manner, I guess you would say. I don't know if I'd say friends, but more like acquaintances or, hey, traveling companions, whatever, accomplices, what have you. But he taught her a lot about the world and how it is. And I just find it the way she did him in, man, or just let him go and die and suffer like that, man, I thought that was... Number one, you want to go and say, yeah, good job, Arya. But number two, you want to go and say, oh, my God, this is just like your descent into darkness. Like, you wouldn't even give him a merciful death? I don't know if I agreed with it or not. I know that, I'm hoping to see the Hound again. But like I said, I don't think he's going to be around. But you never know. If you haven't seen somebody die on camera, it probably didn't happen. So, her scene... done very well with him, and again, just the fight was just one of the better, if not the best, in the series thus far, in my opinion. Now, the final major scene, I mean, there's a little snippet at the end that we'll talk about with Arya, but the final major scene takes place in King's Landing, and it's the scene that everybody's been waiting for since, of course, the trial, and then, of course, the fight 2 weeks ago between the Mountain and Oberyn, and, of course, Tyrion being sentenced to death. The theme for this whole episode, in a lot of ways, at least with King's Landing, is that Charles Dance, Tywin Lannister, his character is at the end of his wit in the sense that all of his children are rebelling against him. Obviously, Cersei, Tywin, of course, Tyrion. Tyrion, we get to his cell, and he's sitting in there, and Jaime walks in, and he's like, oh, cool, you came to hang out and this and that, and Jaime's like, no, I'm coming in to get you out of here. We find out that as they're kind of going through the catacombs and whatnot, the dungeon of King's Landing of the Red Keep, he wind up finding out that Jaime has set something up, and with the help of Varys, the spider, is going to help Tyrion. So he says, okay, they get to this point, and he says, all right, man, you got to go up these stairs, you're going to knock twice on the door, and blah, blah, and then you're going to give the secret handshake and code, and you're going to pay the ferryman a wooden coin to get across the river, and Varys is going to get you out of here, right? So Tyrion says, okay, well, I guess this is goodbye. And it was actually a very touching moment for me. You don't see a lot of these in Game of Thrones. Especially, a lot of it's doom and gloom type stuff. But, you know, he winds up going in and hugging him. And you really felt just the love between these two brothers, you know. Jaime has always cared for Tyrion. And Tyrion felt like he had nobody left. But obviously, Jaime was looking out for him. Varys, despite what he said at the trial, was obviously looking out and trying to help in his own way. So Jaime goes off, and Tyrion goes and looks up the stairs, and the way he hesitates and the music starts playing, I was thinking, oh my God, Cersei got her clutches into Jaime, got her hooks into Jaime, and Jaime now went and thinks that he's setting him up to get out of there, but he's actually setting him up to be killed brutally. Who knows? They left that whole thing hanging with the mountain. Maybe he's still going to be alive and he's going to crush, I don't know, rip him apart in front of Cersei. I just kept thinking so many bad things were going to happen. So he winds up going, and he knows all these different, you know, secret ways through the castle and everything else to keep from when he was obviously Hand of the King. Winds up coming out through this trapdoor. He goes a different way, and he comes out through this trapdoor, and he goes to his old chambers, the Hand of the King's chambers, right? Presumably to confront Tywin, his father. And as he goes and approaches and sees the bed and everything like that with the big four-post bed and everything like that, he goes and he sees Shay laying on the bed, right? The lying, cheating, backstabbing whore that wound up going and testifying against him, you know, at the trial, and lying, straight out lying. We thought it was all by Cersei's doing, and maybe it was initially. But she's laying there, and in her sleep, she's like, oh, Tywin, my lion. So now we know that she's not only been a traitor and a backstabbing bitch, but she's banging Tywin Lannister, Tyrion's dad. Now, if you remember some of the backstory of Tyrion and what Tywin had done to him in the past, and everything else, you'd understand why this is especially a hard part in his heart to get past. As he approaches Shay, she wakes up, and, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, and winds up ensuing this big fight that they have. They fight, and he's trying to get... It's funny, because he's so much smaller than her, and there's one point where he's over, and he's trying to choke her and stuff, but he's got these little hands, you know. Anyway, he winds up going and falling off the bed and pulling on and choking her with her own necklace, right? And that's the second time this season that we've seen somebody die through a necklace, or because of a necklace. Obviously, Joffrey being poisoned was the first. But the way that this was set up, and he was just, oh my God, it was so gut-wrenching, because he's sitting there, and as he's pulling on her, you can see, like, yes, he's turning into a killer now and taking out enemies and whatnot, but he loves her too, you know, so he's very distraught and upset over it. He's like tearing up as he's doing it. It was very strong, very powerful. So he winds up taking her out. She's done, right? After he winds up going and doing that, and then you're thinking, oh my God, you know, and he says, I'm sorry afterwards. And like I said, I think his intention was just to go and confront Tywin, you know, or maybe even do something with him. So he goes down the hall or wherever it is, and now he's carrying this big-ass crossbow, one of those heavy crossbows, you know, that you got to take and you got to use the thing to load it and everything that you saw Joffrey use in Season 2, I think. And he goes down the hall, and this was by far one of the coolest scenes, I guess you would say, in Game of Thrones, at least if you're looking from the acting standpoint, from the dramatic standpoint. He gets his father in the shitter, right? And we see Charles dance. We see Tywin, who is a very strong, powerful character who's always been portrayed with his armor on in a very strong, powerful way. And we see him undressed. He's in his robe. He's sitting there, and he's on the privy. He's in the shitter, right? He's at his weakest, okay? But he still goes and says, put down that weapon and this and that, you know. What have you come to talk to me about? Did you actually think that I was going to have my son executed, you know? And he's just trying to play it off and vie for time to buy his life, you know, because he knows that Tyrion's done. Tyrion's out and this and that. But he plays it off like, I never would have killed you to begin with, you know. And we know that's bullshit. We know he's full of shit. But the conversation that takes place between the two of them is just beautifully done, handled by two of the best actors on the show, hands down. And what he winds up doing is, you know, he says, I killed Shay, you know, and this and he says, I loved her though, you know. And he says, what, that whore? And he just say that again, and I'll pull the trigger, you know. If I hear you say that again, I'll pull the trigger, you know. So as he's talking to his father and everything else about what he's done and what he has done and how he's been this and he's been that, it's just basically like the epitome of his whole life, how he's been just persecuted and hated, and his father's wanted him to die. And he even says, you've wanted me dead your whole life. And he says, that's true. He says, but you won't die. He goes, so I really have to go and I have to compliment and applaud your resilience, your resilience to dying. You've been in all these positions where you could have died. I tried putting you on the battlefield in season 1. You didn't die. I made you the Hand of the King in season 2. And during the Battle of Blackwater, you didn't die. Cersei tried to have somebody killed. You didn't die, So he definitely is. Tyrion's obviously takes a lick and keeps on ticking. But it was really, for me, it was very symbolic of Tyrion and his ability to be able to escape death in many different ways, and even this time obviously being able to do it, and Tywin and all his children turning against him, and ultimately him not being able to go and play his chess game the way he wants to, and his family legacy dying with him on the shitter, because he winds up going and calling Shay a whore again, as he talks about how he loved her and everything else, and Tyrion goes and winds up, boom, putting one right in his stomach, abdomen area, and then as Tywin's like, what the fuck, you shot me type of thing, as he falls back down onto the shitter. He reloads the crossbow, and it's just this agonizingly long, 20 seconds while you watch him go and use the lever, and he loads it up and everything. And then he goes and he puts one last one in Tywin's chest, man, and just puts him down. And man, I loved Tywin as a character because, even though he was an asshole in a lot of ways, you knew that his intentions in his mind were the right thing that he was always doing, and just so powerful, so well done, and honestly, just a great job by the actor, by Charles Dance, that has been in this show since season 1. He premiered, I think, in season 6 or season 1, episode 6 or 7, I believe, or maybe 5. I don't know. It was later in the first season that we did see him. But the point is that anytime he's been on the screen, he's really stole the show, stole the scene, and I thought that it was done so well. And I did want to see Cersei go, but ultimately Tyrion getting a bit of revenge against Shay for doing that, and it being such a difficult thing for him to do. He's turned into a killer, so to speak, but at the same time, he doesn't want to be a killer, right? It's situations that's forced him into this, forced his hand, his life or death here. But he winds up killing his father. Then he goes back through his little, hidden chamber, whatever he does, and goes back up the stairs and knocks on the door. And Varys is like, oh, what have you done, And, I've been waiting for you here for half an hour, So anyway, Varys goes and gets him into this crate and winds up getting him on a shipping thing. We see that the last scene that we see at King's Landing is him being off at the docks, and Varys is about to leave Tyrion, of course, on there. I don't know where he's getting shipped off to. And as he goes and turns and goes to walk back to it, the bells start ringing at the Red Keep, and I'm assuming that signifies the shit hit the fan, or obviously because of Tywin's death, And I think Varys realizes that it's not going to be a good place to be, so he winds up going and getting back onto the ship and rethinking his whole idea. So just so masterfully done and so well executed. I just absolutely loved every bit of it, and hope that you liked it as much as I did. And the last little teaser snippet of a 2-minute scene, I guess you would say, is with Arya, and she has traveled and made it to a port, and she's trying to go and obtain passage on a ship from the captain with what little money she has, and she wants to go north to the Wall. And the captain says, there's nothing good there, there's nothing but death and destruction that way, blah, blah, blah. She's trying to get to, obviously, Jon Snow, her brother. And one of the only family members that she has left, because she's not aware of Sansa, of course, being alive, who we didn't see in this episode either, which was, you didn't see the Darth Sansa, but it is what it is. We'll see her next season. She's really just starting to become interesting. So Arya goes, and the guy says, well, I'm not going there. We're going somewhere else. And she says, where? And he says, well, to the, to the Freelands, across the sea, to Braavos, right? Now, we remember that Jaqen H'ghar gave her that coin, right? And he said, if you ever need to get to Braavos or you ever need to contact me, find someone, a Bravosi or whatever from Braavos, hand them this coin and say the words, Valer Morghulis, right? And that means all men must die in High Valyrian, but basically they'll recognize it and they'll find me or whatever the deal is. That's how you'll be able to find me again. So she finds out that this guy's going to Braavos, and she pulls out the coin. He's like, I don't want your money, girl, and this and that. And she's like, boom, hands him the coin, and he's just like, he's awestruck, that she even has this thing. Then she says, Valer Morghulis. And I thought it was really cool to end the season off that way, because I've wanted to see her go and get reunited with, hopefully, Cyril, her water dancing teacher or whatever, because we never did see him die at the end of season 1 there, So I think he's still alive. And then, of course, the whole thing with Jaqen H'ghar and being able to change faces and everything else. Arya's going to go off and wind up learning some shit. And, because remember, she's got her list, and she's going to be a bad bitch, Man, some big deaths this year, though. Things wind up ending off that way. That's how the season ends. And honestly, it has been my favorite season thus far. I have truly enjoyed, even though it's been a little nerve-wracking, and I've had just some mental and stomach type issues over trying to get everything in order and trying to do these reviews. For the most part, they've been received very well, and I'm looking forward to doing these in the future, obviously for next season moving forward. I'm also going to work in the off season on actually doing reviews for each episode of the first 3 seasons as well, and kind of breaking them down in my own style, in my own way. So hopefully you'll tune in for those as well. My episode question for you, though, brothers and sisters, is really, what were your thoughts on the season as a whole? Was it your favorite thus far? Do you think things wrapped up very well? And really, where do you think we're going to go in the future over here? And of course, the book readers, I appreciate it if you don't answer that one, because I don't want to be spoiled as to what's going to happen. I believe that this season 4 actually ended off where book 3, it was the latter half of book 3, and I know obviously there's 2 books after that. So, but leave your answer to that question in the comments down below. Feel free to hit the thumbs up, the like button if you should think that I deserve it, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We will look forward to catching you in season 5 or the next one, nation. Stannis, the one true king, tells you to subscribe to my other channels and follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram too.